This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Congressman Scott, who he represents the 8th Congressional District. Is that
That's
correct?
Right. Absolutely.
And,
Glad to be here.
and it's great to have you here, Congressman. I was trying to think in my own mind how many counties there are in your district. It's a big number, isn't it? In the 20s, 30s, some number like that, a big number?
It's over 20 in the old district, and we gained a few additional counties in the new district. So the older district ran from Colquitt County all the way up to Covington, Georgia, and then the new district of the 8th runs from Lowndes County and Thomas County up to northern Bibb County.
Wow, that's a big area. Now, I think my spies tell me you're a country boy. Is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Tifton, Georgia.
Well, okay, Tifton. And so how did you make your way to Washington? That's quite a story, isn't it? You always wanted to do this, or was it by accident, or how did that happen?
Well, when I was 26, I ran for the state legislature, and fortunate enough to serve 14 years in the Georgia legislature.
Yes.
Served on Ways and Means and Appropriations.
Now, is that a big deal? I mean, just to ask, what does that mean when you're on Ways and Means? That's a big deal, isn't it?
Well, Ways and Means deals with the tax policy
yes.
and the revenue side of the balance
yes,
sheet, if you will,
yes.
and Appropriations deals with the expenditures.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, there are significant differences in the way taxpayer funds are handled at the state level and the way they're handled at the federal level.
Well, now, are they a lot more tight-fisted up under the Golden Dome, or is that, what are some differences?
Well, I'll tell you, the key difference is the balanced budget amendment. And,
yes.
and one of the chief complaints right now is that, well, Congress won't work together.
Yes.
Well, when you have the balanced budget amendment, as you do at the states, it forces both sides to
yes.
work
yes.
together. And
yes.
so at the state level, when we were passing a budget,
right.
the governor would give us a revenue estimate. The
right.
estimate would be based on last year's tax receipts.
Yes. Yes.
An actual number.
Right. You had a big number there, so you weren't kidding around, right? You had a real number produced by real people, right?
Absolutely. And then the state economist would give you either a good economic outlook
yes,
or a
yes,
bad one based
right,
on what was
yes,
happening
yes.
with regard to employment. And the key
yes,
to a good economy is jobs and having people back to work. And so if things looked good, you may see a 2.5% increase in anticipated revenue.
Yes.
And if things look bad, obviously the decrease would be reflected.
Right.
And so we would pass the budget
yes.
based on the revenue estimate. 6 months later,
yes. Yes.
we would adjust again based on the actual dollars being collected. So it kept, by doing that, it kept you from ever running
yes.
A deficit, and which kept you from ever accumulating any amount of debt.
Yes.
Now, the state has bonds that we issue, but those bonds are issued for capital projects
yes.
like construction
yes. Yes.
projects on campuses and other things, whereas the federal government is issuing debt simply to pay the light bill.
Yes. Now there's a lot of discussion about that right now, about the trouble the country is in, and we have these enormous debt we've run up. Now, you've mentioned something called the balanced budget amendment. I mean, what exactly is that? That's not in the Constitution, I take it now. Is that correct?
No, it's not in the Constitution now. Every state that has the ability to issue debt has a balanced budget amendment, just
yes.
like the state of Georgia
yes.
does. And so what we tried to pass was some of the same fiscal discipline
yes.
on the federal government that the states have had to have with regard to their budget, and making sure that their expenditures match
yes.
their revenues.
Right.
88 of the 89 freshmen
yes.
Republicans voted for that. I was hopeful that we would get it out of the House. It fell a few votes short.
Yes. Yes.
We obviously have challenges in getting it through
yes.
the Senate. But remember this, when we pass the balanced budget amendment through the House in Washington and
yes.
through the Senate, if
yes.
we're able to get those votes, all it does, it goes to the states, and then the states still have to ratify it before it
yes.
ever would become binding
yes.
on the federal
yes.
government to
yes.
balance the budget. But you can't continue to deficit spend. Everybody knows that. You
Yes,
cannot
yes.
run $1 trillion deficit, as has been done for the past 4 years,
Yes.
and pretend that the accumulation of debt doesn't affect the economic opportunities.
It's
of
a
Americans.
big deal, isn't it? I mean, the debt is just rocketed up enormously, and I mean, it seems to be pretty much out of control. And that doesn't bode well for our nation, does it? I mean,
Well, it certainly, generational theft is a term
Yes.
that many have used, and so you're spending the tax receipts of
Yes.
tomorrow's generation today.
Yes, yes.
And it takes away the opportunities that the next
Yes.
generation of Americans, our kids, have. And
Yes.
so we're going to work to continue to reduce that deficit, hopefully get
Yes.
that balanced budget amendment passed out of the House and the
Yes.
Senate, and get it back to the people.
Isn't that a common political failing when someone is in a position of power and the constituents are asking for one gift after the next? If you just run a deficit, then you don't have to worry about it until your time is passed.
And therein lies the need for it to be ingrained in the Constitution.
Yes, yes.
If as somebody from the Appropriations Committee in the state of Georgia,
Yes, yes.
I can tell you honestly that had we not had the balanced budget amendment,
Yes.
I think that in times where we face difficult challenges,
Yes.
that it wouldn't have been balanced
Yes,
at the
yes,
state
yes,
level without
yes,
those
yes,
constitutional
yes.
mandates, and then you would see the states having more challenges
Yes,
than they currently have
yes,
today.
Yes. Now, Austin, you mentioned that you were in a class of, 89 people. Is that right? Am I get that right? And
89.
And my spies tell me that you were elected president of that class. Wow, well, that's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, had you been to charm school, or how would you get this honor? I mean, what happened?
I'll tell you, I've been accused of a lot of things, but I've never been accused of going to charm school. And, it's one of those things where our class is full of young people, and many of us are small business owners.
Yes, yes.
And the identifying factor with us is our kids. We
Yes,
have over
yes.
300 children and grandchildren.
Yes.
And we understand that we were elected in a wave
Yes.
of dissatisfaction
Yes.
from Americans with
Yes.
what was going on
Yes.
in Washington. Many of my colleagues that were elected as Republicans were elected in districts that
Yes.
the president got 60% of the
Yes,
vote in.
yes,
Now,
yes.
you think about the fact that in 1 year they vote by 60% to elect a Democratic president
Yes, yes.
in a district.
Yes.
And just 2 years later, after the deficit spending and the health care
Yes,
bill and the
yes,
other things,
yes.
they turn around and elect a Republican
Yes,
in that
yes,
same congressional
yes.
district. That's a pretty big swing from
Yes,
the
yes.
voters, and I think that it's indicative of the dissatisfaction that there is between Americans and what's going on in Washington.
Well, what's it like up there? I mean, if I may, I say you're from Tift County. That's kind of
Sure.
a country part of the world, and you're up in the big city, or the big bad city. I mean, what's that like? I mean, what's your day like? What's it like to be a congressman?
Well, when I'm back home and people say, it just seems like a different world, and the way
Yes,
people think
yes,
inside
yes,
the Beltway,
yes.
I agree with them.
Yes.
And sometimes people can stay too long.
Yes, yes.
I think that I'm very much a newfound believer in term limits.
Really?
I don't think they should be as short as some people do. I think it should be in the 10 to 12 year range.
Yes.
Because I do think you need continuity of
Yes.
knowledge and service. But the fact of the matter is, we're continuing to do things in Washington the same way they did them decades
Yes,
ago.
yes.
And it's almost like the old Zig Ziglar story when
Yes.
when someone asked, why do you cut the end off the ham? And they said, well, that's the way my mom did it.
Yes,
and
yes.
so they call the mom, and the mom says, well, that's the way my
That's
mom
what
did it.
you-
And they
yes,
say,
yes.
well, Grandmom, why'd you cut the end off the ham? And she said, well, it wouldn't fit in my little oven that I
Right,
had.
right.
back
So
then."
that's yes,
So we know, Americans know that we can't continue down the path we're on.
yes,
We as the freshmen Republicans know that we can't continue down the
Yes.
path we're on. We believe that the deficit is the enemy
Yes.
of our children, is the greatest
Right, right,
challenge
right.
that we as a country face. And so you'll see many of us casting votes.
Yes.
I, for example, voted against the payroll tax
yes,
cut. The final bill that came through had a $100 billion
Yes.
deficit
Yes.
in it. A $100 billion deficit in that
right.
one piece of legislation. Now, it wasn't that.
Well, I guess that took a certain fortitude to do that. I mean, is that right? That's a rather brave thing to have done in this world.
We supported the pieces of legislation when it had what we call the pay for in it.
Yes.
As long as it wasn't going to deficit spend.
Right.
And we were going to reduce spending at
Right.
another level.
Right.
We certainly didn't want to take the money out of the Social Security system.
Right.
And yet, if you take it out of the general fund without
Right.
reducing expenses on another line,
Yes.
then what you've done is you've deficit spent. And I think the end result of it, unfortunately, is that you'll see the national debt limit reached sooner
Yes.
rather than later.
Well, all these extraordinary entitlements that are in sort of the national psyche, they're not affordable. I mean, isn't the only thing that will happen is we'll have some terrific crisis ultimately, like we're seeing in Europe? I mean, how are those entitlements cut back? Will Washington look like Athens, Greece? I mean, what'll happen?
I'll tell you, I think that's up to the American public. I have every faith in the world in our democracy that if the people that have been elected in Washington
Yes.
allow us to continue down
Yes.
this path, that when the voters go to the poll, they're
Yes.
going to put different people in those seats
Yes.
that won't allow it to continue. So I have faith in our democracy. I think that you saw the drastic swing in Congress and in
Yes.
those districts where some of them were 60% Democrat
Right,
that voted
right,
for a
right,
Republican congressman.
right.
It wasn't that in those districts where the swings were that dramatic that those people all of a sudden became Republican.
Yes.
It was that, again, the deficit, whether you're a Democrat or
Yes.
or a Republican,
Yes,
you recognize
yes,
it's
yes.
a problem
Yes.
for future generations of Americans and you want it stopped.
Yes.
People want a plan. They want a path
Yes.
out of this. The path out of it, quite honestly, has got to include some changes to mandatory spending.
Yes.
Mandatory spending is Social Security, it's Medicare,
Yes.
it's food stamps, which has
Yes.
grown from $40 billion to $80 billion a year in
Yes.
spending.
Yes.
It's Medicaid.
Yes.
And so they don't have to be drastic changes.
Yes.
But you have to make continual progress in the right direction.
Well, one of the things I do, Austin, is beat the drum a little bit about what can we do for healthcare efficiency. I mean, trying
Sure.
to make things more efficient, at least on a local level. And
Sure.
in doing that, we often encounter encumbrances that the feds put there.
Sure,
So it's
absolutely.
really quite a situation, isn't it? And one of the biggest things facing the nation is the Health Reform Act, which
Right.
people call Obamacare. It's
Right.
about to occur, isn't it? I mean, it's really about to happen.
The National Health Care Bill, and
Yes.
there's significant issues with it. In fact, it's going before the Supreme Court. They'll
Yes.
start the discussions. The hearings will be this month.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and then the decision will be forthcoming in the next
Yes,
3 to 4 months
yes.
once they're followed. But there is the mandate in the bill that you have to purchase a product.
Yes.
And quite honestly, I believe that that's absolutely unconstitutional.
Yes.
I don't think that it's any different than the federal government mandating that you have a bank account, or
Yes,
mandating
yes.
that you have a car, or mandating
Yes,
that you have
yes.
a house. The forefathers of this country never intended for the
yes,
federal government
yes.
to be able to mandate that you purchase
Yes.
in individual products. So I'm hopeful that the court will overturn it. I will tell you, from the standpoint of the economy and the challenge that we face with regard to the
Yes,
deficit,
yes.
the number one issue is jobs.
Yes.
How do we get Americans back to work?
Yes.
That's it. You want to reduce the deficit. You want
Yes,
to fix the
yes,
problems in the country.
yes, yes.
You get Americans back to work. And I recognize that we've got a few out there that take advantage of the system. But
Yes,
the vast
yes.
majority of Americans want a job. They've
Yes,
got pride.
yes,
They've
right,
got that
yes,
American
sure,
pride and want
sure,
a job.
sure.
The unfortunate thing about this health care bill is the way it's drafted is that if you're an employer with 55 employees,
Yes.
you have to comply with the bill.
Yes.
Well, our goal should be for the economy to have that employer that has 55 employees to grow to 60 employees.
Yes. Yes.
Unfortunately, because of the way this bill is drafted, if you have 55,
Yes.
you're going to have to deal with a tremendous regulatory
Yes,
burden
yes.
and cost of compliance with the bill.
Yes.
And so you're going to be encouraged to reduce your workforce to
Right.
50.
Right.
Well, small business growth
Yes,
is where
yes,
our jobs
yes.
can and should come from.
Yes.
You as a doctor.
Sure. Sure.
I mean, physician offices that used to be able to operate with 3 or 4 employees
Yes,
per
yes.
physician now have significantly more in most
yes.
cases.
Yes. Yes.
But regardless of what business you're in, you're going to be encouraged to have 50 or fewer employees. Now, what we hear when we're out talking with people in the manufacturing side
Yes.
of the economy, if you're talking to the John Deeres of the world, things are good for them.
Yes.
John Deere has sold out
Right.
100% of their 2012 production. Where you've got the problem with job growth and getting the economy back on track is that the suppliers
Yes.
of the major manufacturers are the ones that have not been able to deal with the rules and the regulations and the increased cost of doing business because of the rules and regulations, and will
Yes.
have the most difficulty in complying with the cost of the national health care law. And so as I'm talking to the manufacturers in the district, one of their big fears for the economy is that their suppliers
Yes.
are now coming from overseas instead of
Yes. Yes.
down the street.
I've heard it said that, I mean, maybe you can speak to this point, that it's absolutely impossible to read the 2,000 pages that were tossed into this bill.
That's right.
And it's not just in the King's English, if I could say that. It's
That's
the
right.
most contorted legalese imaginable. And just discovering what one paragraph means is very daunting. Have you heard that?
Well, that's absolutely right, and you could literally read the Bible
Yes.
in a shorter period of time than you could read the piece of legislation.
Yes.
Cross-reference it with the other code sections that are
Right.
necessary to understand what is being done in the legislation.
Right.
We had the perfect example that when they passed it, they didn't understand what was in it with the 1099 provision of it, which even the president agreed to repeal.
Now,
And
what is the 1099?
The 1099 provision said that every business out there was going to have to issue a 1099 to any vendor that it did business
Yes.
with, that it did more than, I believe the price was $600 per year
So,
worth of business in it. So you as a small business
Yes.
owner, when I was in business,
Yes.
I would have to issue a 1099 to my cell phone carrier.
Right, right. It would
my
be just
telephone
unbelievable,
carrier,
wouldn't it?
Absolutely, it was a tremendous accounting burden on employers, and so there, that aspect of it has been repealed. The president
Yes.
did agree to repeal that, but it's just another indication of the fact that the bill was not read
Yes.
prior to it being passed. The other issue I'll tell you with regard to the bill, and whether you support national health care or
Yes,
you don't,
yes.
I don't support
Yes.
the national health care program. It ought to at least be workable.
Yes, sure.
Well, the way this bill is set up, the individual citizen would have a contract with a health care exchange.
Yes.
Now, only 13 states have started setting up the health care exchanges yet. The health care exchange on a monthly basis will report
Yes.
to the Health and Human Services Division whether or not you do or don't have coverage. Health and Human Services will then on a monthly basis report to the IRS whether or not you do or don't have
Yes.
coverage. The IRS will then on a monthly basis determine whether or not, based on who they believe your employer was,
Yes.
determine whether somebody gets a penalty and somebody gets a credit. So this is going to happen 12 times a year.
Yes.
For every citizen covered under health care
It's just
exchange.
unbelievable, is it? The aggregation of power that took place with this. I mean, it's very disturbing. I'm particularly disturbed, as you mentioned earlier, about the idea that if you're down in Tiff County and you're in a treehouse,
Yeah.
and you lock yourself up in the treehouse, and that you have your radio on a little too loud, you've got a little portable radio, the government can basically just say whatever they want. They can make you turn the radio off. They can do anything they want. There's no limit to their power if this is ruled constitutional. Isn't that correct? There's nothing the government could not do.
I think that's a pretty accurate description, and I'll tell you, even the people I've talked with who actually wanted a national health care plan,
Yes.
or I shouldn't say a national health care plan, I should say universal coverage.
Yes.
There were people that supported universal coverage that are very much opposed to this
Sure,
piece of
sure,
legislation
sure.
because they know it's not practical and won't work.
Well, everybody that wants healthcare to be more efficient, they want it to cost less,
Absolutely.
and the system is working on trying to get that accomplished. But this is just an extraordinary event that's about to impact every American citizen. I mean, it's coming very, very soon, and before we know it, wow.
Pulled $500 billion out of Medicare
Yes.
Advantage.
Yes.
It assumes a 27% reduction in payments to
Yes.
physicians.
Yes.
There are a lot of things in this legislation that are absolutely horrible for the quality of health care in this country.
Well, one of the things I think is is Medicaid. I'm told that it will take Georgia down, just the state government having to pay the increased Medicaid expenses the bill mandates. I mean, all kinds of things.
Well, the increases in the eligibility certainly lead to increased cost for the states.
Yes.
And when you're in a balanced budget environment, as all of the states are, that obviously puts pressure on other areas like education, where the funds end up coming from. And with that said, is a perfect opportunity for me to talk about essentially our belief in that, with regard to Medicaid, is that block grants back to the states give the states a better ability to handle things with regard to issues that are specific for their state. For example, the state of Georgia, we have a high concentration of diabetics in the state of Georgia.
Yes.
It would make sense for us to, at the state level, not at the federal level, work more on diabetes.
Yes.
And yet, there are other states who may not have as high a concentration of diabetes as we do, but they may have another issue, and let those states work on those issues that are particular to them.
Well, we are a republic, are we not? I mean, so in other words, the way the states came together, it's not a unitary situation, is it? I mean, there's a balance of powers between the states and the federal government, and that's what our forefathers wanted. And that would be an important thing to have happen. Well, as you look at the future, I mean, do you have any prophecies about how what's going to happen in Washington? I mean, can you turn this back? Is it possible to do something? I mean, can you pass some new laws, or how does it work?
Absolutely, we can turn this thing back. Look, Americans want to go back to work.
Yes.
Americans want to go back to work.
Yes.
We want Americans to go back to work. Small businesses want to put them back to work.
Yes. Yes.
What we have to do is to simply do a better job of articulating that a smaller Washington, a smaller, less intrusive Washington, is better for the American people.
Yes.
We're still going to have the safety nets out there. We're going to take care of Medicare. We're going to take care of Social Security. The changes that we proposed didn't affect anybody that was over the age of 55, but acknowledge that for my generation, someone who's 42 years old, that I'm not going to be able to retire at the current retirement age that's scheduled in the current Social Security program. So absolutely, we're going to put Americans back to work by getting Washington out of the way. Local banks want to loan the money to small businesses who want to put Americans back to work. Let's think about one other thing they did. Let's look at the Dodd-Frank bill.
Yes.
What they did in Washington is they passed a piece of legislation that gave the agencies the ability to make a tremendous amount of rules and regulations.
Yes.
The Dodd-Frank bill was passed as an end result of complex financial instruments that most Americans don't even understand.
Yes.
And yet the piece of legislation that was passed has led to over 70 bank closures.
Yes.
The majority of which are community bank closures.
Yes.
And in the end, many of the people who caused the problems ended up being propped up.
Yes.
And your local community bank ended up being the one that was pushed under the water.
Right.
So just another example of how more Washington doesn't necessarily work for Main Street.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're in the process of trying to defang the great beast there. I mean, are you blocked or frustrated by the power of the executive branch, or how does that look, or is that working, or what's that like?
I do believe that Congress has ceded too much power to the executive branch, and when Congress passes a piece of legislation that gives the rule-making authority, if you will, to the legislative branch, then I think that they are in effect being negligent in their jobs in many cases. So one of the things that I would like to see is that any of the rules proposed by the various agencies come back before the Committee of Jurisdiction in Congress that actually has jurisdiction over that particular agency.
Yes.
And get an up or a down vote by the committee.
Now, Austin, you're on some committees. What's that like? I mean, does a lot of business happen on the committees, or what?
Well,
what's that like?
We're on the Armed Services Committee, which obviously right here.
That's a big deal.
Hey, Robins Air Force Base is I tell you what, that's first and foremost for us.
Yes.
And we're on the base on a regular basis, and certainly meet with the leadership of the base in Warner Robins on a regular basis, and meet with the leadership of the Air Force in
Yes.
Washington
It's
on
a
a
pretty
regular
important
basis.
base. I mean, do you think it's safe? I've heard comments about the, I guess there's always some danger of a base closure, or that doesn't seem too possible to you, does it? Or?
The Air Force is absolutely committed to a 3-depot strategy,
Yes.
which is the most important thing for Robins. We're out there consistently trying to get additional missions for Robins.
Yes.
I believe that Robins will continue to grow.
Yes.
Very concerned about sequestration.
Yes.
I did not vote for sequestration.
Yes.
I'm doing what I can to undo sequestration.
Yes.
And I think that our future at Robins is very, very bright. We're
Yes.
going to continue to grow. We've had great leadership in General McMahon.
Yes.
And we'll have, our bumps along the way as we go to balancing the budget. But
Yes.
we're going to bounce back, and we're going to be better than ever. And so I have every faith in the world in General McMahon and the leadership
Yes.
at the base,
Yes.
and the people that work there. Quite honestly, they're a model of efficiency. The thing I will tell you that if you want to take something that you can think about, is that there's been a proposal to increase the premiums for many of our veterans by
Yes.
5-fold by this administration, and charging them 5 times what they're currently charging them for TRICARE Prime.
Now, why is that? Why did they do that? Is there a reason?
Well, I quite honestly think it's picking on the military
Really?
and the men and women that are serving the country, protecting our
Yes,
constitutional
yes.
rights. But contrast that with what happened just a few weeks ago with regard to religious organizations' First Amendment rights.
Yes.
And it's not, they've been very creative in trying to make this appear to be a women's health care issue.
Yes.
when they told the Catholic Church that they
Right.
were going to have to provide coverage for
Yes.
procedures that are contrary to
Right.
Catholics' moral,
Sure.
fundamental beliefs and what they believe is godly.
Yes.
But take what they said there with, you're going to do this and you're going to do it for free,
Yes.
and contrast that with the 5-fold increase in the premiums for our men and women on TRICARE
Yes.
and TRICARE Prime. And that's a pretty...
That's a pretty well, and you stood up for our sailors, soldiers, and airmen, did you not? Well, how's the war going? Are you going to be successful? How does it look?
Well,
on that issue.
I think we were premature in our withdrawal.
Yes.
And I think that we were premature in our withdrawal. Unfortunately, Iraq. I don't blame that necessarily on one particular person.
Yes.
But if the governor of Iraq is not going to give our men and women the ability to conduct themselves
Yes.
under the stresses and the means necessary
Yes,
in a war
yes,
with
yes.
the immunity clauses, then we're certainly not going to subject our men and women to a foreign court for
Yes, yes,
protecting
sure.
their country. The challenges in Afghanistan, again, terrorism is a real threat to us.
Yes.
And had we not gone over there and busted up those networks, then I have no doubt that there would have been another attack in America. And I don't think that our men and women in military and the
Yes.
leadership of this country get enough credit, especially the men and women in the military, and for protecting us
Yes.
from those attacks.
Well, Austin, it's been a pleasure having you with us today, and keep up the good work. I know that's quite a challenge for anyone, and you're representing your interests of your constituents, and in a good way. And we're just delighted to have you here tonight.
Glad to be
Thank you.
here.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thanks a
having
lot.
us.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.